Hey, okay, I want to talk to you today about cycles, okay? And I want to talk to you about the cycles of your life, but we're going to talk about the cycles of life from a different perspective, okay? We're going to talk about it from an elemental perspective. And I'm going to start talking about it in a natural way. And by natural way, I mean like the cycles of nature. So let's look at the cycle of a year. We have 4 seasons, and in those seasons, we go through an entire cycle. Okay, so for example, the first technical season of the year would be spring, right? Okay, so when we are coming into spring, it's the beginning of the year because it is the new beginning, right? Winter is the end of the cycle. The beginning of the cycle would be the fading of the old, the renewal of life in the way of rebirth. When we look at like the grass turns brown in the winter. But in the spring, we get a whole bunch of rain, which feeds the grass. There's a whole bunch of sunshine, which feeds the grass. We get a bunch of warmer weather, which allows the dirt in which the grass is to warm up to a place of where it provides the right environment for the grass to grow. And then it shoots up, right? So another thing that happens is we have the popping up of dandelions. Color pops into our life, right? And then the early spring flowers start to come in, and we get even more color. And in the United States, we have the saying, April showers bring May flowers, right? So it may seem like a kind of rainy period that isn't really all that warm. It's only sometimes warm, like some days you go outside and winter shows back up, right? And it's like, oh, it's cold again. I just want the warmth. And then, by the end of the season, we've got little tiny plants that are ready to really burst into life in summer. Okay. And then the end of spring fades directly into summer. And now we're not just getting warmer weather, the sun is around for longer. And the more that the sun is in our life, the more the energy starts to rise. So we have this fresh start that is turning into something beautiful, right? And then we end up getting all of the fruits of all of the labors of spring in summer. And we have higher energy and it's warmer and we want to be outside and we gather things around us that are beautiful. There's more color in our lives. We get our food from outside. There's things that we do in the summer that we aren't able to do the rest of the year, like going to the beach. It's a totally different time, a lot of energy, a lot of time outside, and this feeling of elation comes over us. Okay, and then that starts to fade into fall. And during fall, we see things start to shift into a downward kind of cycle, right? We start to see the changing of the colors of the leaves, which we love because it's gorgeous. We see the transition from the green to the reds and the golds and the browns, and then the sun starts to go away and it starts to get cooler. And if you live somewhere that starts to get breezy I'm thinking of Winnie the Pooh and the blustery day. I don't know why. But we start to see like the beauty of summer starts to change to the beauty of transition, and then we fade into the darker season again. And as we fade into the colder seasons, it's a time for hibernation, it's a time for reflection, it's a time to look at what happened throughout the year that is kind of dead in our lives now, like to the point of where like it's frozen over. And then everything fades and it's all gone. And everything that had shown up at the beginning of the year is now underneath the snow. So when we look at just the cycle of a year of the seasons, we can see the same kind of cycles in our lives, right? So if we look at like winter, and I don't want to say this in a way that like brings you down, but like if we look at winter as like a lull in our life, or even like a time that we don't want to have, then we make this kind of incubation period, this reflection period, this period of our lives to look at and realize that nothing's permanent. We change that from a positive, like releasing kind of aspect to holding on to something that doesn't need to be held on to. So let's look at that from your own personal standpoint. And I'm going to break it down into 4-month period instead of the 4 cycles of 3 months period. We're going to look at 3 cycles of 4 months of periods. Okay, so if we break it down in this way, we see the transition in a different way. Okay, so let's look at spring again from a 4-month perspective instead of a 3-month perspective, starting in, let's say, February. So the very tail end of winter, we begin our year. So when we look at it from this perspective, we start February out barren, right? It's one of the coldest months. It feels like it's just dragging out longer and longer and longer. And so we're ready to get rid of this period in our lives. So this is a period of time in our lives where we're recalibrating. Okay, this first month of February, we're looking at what no longer serves us from the past, and we're trying to determine what is it that we want to plant for spring. Okay, a lot of people who grow from home, they begin their shoots in February. They start growing those things inside of their house because it's not quite suitable outside yet, right? So from an internal perspective, when you're in this first part of the series or the season of the year, it's a time for you to reflect on the last part of the year. What is no longer in your life that is no longer serving you? Okay, so the beginning of a cycle is the time for you to go, you know what? I didn't like that. So now I'm going to readjust my focus. I'm going to plant new seeds for the coming year. And I'm going to nurture those seeds throughout the year so that I can see them last instead of fading away. Okay, so the very first phase of this cycle is uncovering. Okay, and it's the same exact thing as like the 4 phases of forgiveness. It works out perfectly in this way. Okay, so we can look at these things as, what are we uncovering about the past that no longer serves us, and looking not at the future but towards the future. What would be better in my life? What is better for me in the long run that's going to help me reach my goals? Okay, then we fade into the second part of this season, and we're really truly giving our nurturing, loving care to those seeds that we're planting. And we are making sure they're getting the right amount of sunlight, the right amount of nurturing, the right amount of nutrition, and the right amount of energy. Okay, and we do this even in our regular lives, right? When we decide to change, it's not just bam, we've changed. It is now a maintenance period. We have to truly work towards reprogramming ourselves. And when we're planting these new seeds, we're reprogramming ourselves to focus on those seeds and to stop focusing on that which no longer serves us in our lives. Okay, and so then we move into this next phase, and this next phase is when the sprouts start sprouting, right? And we're starting to see that our habits are changing. And we're appreciating that they're changing because now we have a little bit of color popping up in our lives. Yeah, there's still rainy days. Yeah, there's still cold days, but our seeds are safe. Our seeds are safe because we're nurturing them the way that they need to be nurtured. Okay. And then as we go into the next phase, this is a perfect phase. We're getting ready to go into a new season. Okay. But we got to look back. We got to reflect. We got to see, okay, what has changed in my life that is leading to further change? Okay, I'll give you a perfect example. In this last 4 month period that I've gone through, I have looked at everything from my past, every way that I interacted with other people, and I am adjusting the way that I talk, the way that I present myself, the way that I love myself, the way that I engage not only with myself but with other people in a more productive way. Okay, and I can go and look back at those last 4 months and all of the changes I've made, and I can determine, okay, I like the way this feels. I like the way that I like the product I'm starting to get. It may not be a complete blossom and I may not be able to get like green beans from my green bean plant, but I know that it's doing well. And if I continue to nurture it the same way that I've been nurturing it, it's going to grow into a very fruitful plant. Okay? And so these cycles, and this is exactly what it is, you spend in the 4 month period or whatever period it is, there's 4 phases, right? So every cycle has a level. You got one season, you've got uh, one moon cycle, one season, 1 year, a decade. Everything has its cycles, and so if we look at life as cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle, we have the opportunity to reevaluate every beginning and end of a cycle. So the beginning of the cycle is reconfiguration, while the end of the cycle is adjustments, right? Is there anything that I need to adjust in the last cycle that I did, that I changed, that needs to be changed even more? Okay. Um, So I really like looking at life in cycles based on change. Um, there are 5 stages in change. And so if we look at the first stage of change as the entire season of winter, like before you were even like starting to realize that you needed change, then we can see the second through fifth phase of change, stages of change, are actually your cycle, right? Because the fifth stage of change never ends. It's maintenance. You will always maintain that change if you always work on that change. Now, don't get me wrong, there comes a point when it is no longer just a habit, it actually becomes a part of your person. And in that case, like, yeah, it's finalized in that final stage, but that doesn't mean that you can't slip back, because you can't. And I want to keep this high vibe, but I have met people who have, and not just met people, but I treated people who went like, 15, 20 years in sobriety and then relapsed and had one of the worst relapses of their lives. So it's not something that we can ever count on to truly be a change unless we make sure that we are always present and cognizant of what we are choosing. And this comes from looking at life this exact way, like every cycle, like making sure that you're still on track, seeing if there's anything that needs to be adjusted, because life is an experience, life is training, life is learning, life is experiencing. So if we're not taking note of what we're experiencing, we're likely gonna like repeat the same cycles over and over again. And that's why it's important to know your own history. Because if we don't know our own history, we're more than likely going to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Okay? I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. Bye.